We've got some interesting free agency rumors and NFL Combine buzz to get to on today's show. But first things first, like today's video if you believe in Andrew Berry. If you believe that AB is going to get this team back to a winning season and nail this offseason, hit that thumbs up icon to start the show. What's going on, Browns fans? Welcome into the Cleveland Browns Report by Chat Sports. Matthew Peterson here, back from my trip from the UK. I had an awesome week in London. Highly recommend if you've never been over there, but it is good to be back, and I missed a lot, I feel like. I thought I was going to go out of town when it was kind of a dead period of the offseason, but we've got a lot to get to on today's show, from the NFL Combine underway to some free agency buzz and even some draft talk. A lot to get to. But first, I want to spend a few minutes just touching on the Combine and kind of get you guys in the fold on what's going on in Indianapolis, as the Browns have been meeting with several players, and this list will only continue to grow. But right now, they have met with 5 players so far, at least that I can find. That would be Parker Washington, the wide receiver from Penn State; Tyler Scott, the Buckeye himself from Cincinnati, another wide receiver; Antoine Green from UNC; Jamie Robinson from Florida State; and then Julius Brents, a corner from Kansas State. So those are the 5 players they have met with so far. If I could zone in on just one of them, Parker Washington really jumps out to me, the Penn State Nittany Lion wide receiver. He's got a lot of buzz right now. I mean, that's just the nature of the Combine, though, is anytime you've got awesome physical traits, even though you haven't played football in months, you're going to take off when you get to run the 40 and show your broad jump and things like that. So that is one player to keep an eye on just a little bit, put in the tickler file. Another one is Jamie Robinson. So the Florida State safety, who I'm a big fan of in terms of his playing style. He's a hard-hitting safety. He's good against the run. He's also got some good coverage techniques and whatnot with him. So those are 2 names to keep an eye on. Now, Robinson is an interesting one because it kind of ties into what I want to go to next on the show, and that is the potential of Jessie Bates. But first, the NFL offseason is heating up big time, and you don't want to miss a thing, which is why you have to be subscribed. So hit that sub button, because when more Combine leaks start coming out and we get some real free agency buzz and then some free agency signings less than 2 weeks away right now, you won't miss a thing when you're subscribed. Let's switch gears and talk about Jessie Bates, though. So while I was gone, big news dropped, right? John Johnson was released, Harrison Graham filled in, and Mary Kay reported that the Browns are looking at Jessie Bates to replace John Johnson. Now, the latest reports are that Bates is looking to reset the safety market, and we'll look at some figures in just a moment. But the big question I have is, should the Browns spend big on safety or defensive line? I think they've got it in them for one big swing, one $20-ish million contract per year. Do they want that to be at Bates at safety or someone on the defensive line? Because I think it's either or. Now, here's what Mary Kay said about Bates going to Cleveland. The Browns are expected to pursue Bates if he's not extended, franchised, or traded to someone besides the Browns. A 2020 second-team All-Pro, Bates would likely average more than $14 million a year in a new deal, but he's the caliber of impact safety the Browns are seeking to replace Johnson. So when we look at the highest paid safeties right now, what does that look like if he's looking to reset the market? I think that looks like $20 million. And remember, being the highest paid player at a position does not mean you're the best at that position. It just means you're the last one to get a big contract, okay? And I think he's going to get way north of $14 million. He is definitely in the category of your Justin Simmons, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Jamal Adams of the league. Is he going to fetch $20 million? Could be, right? That's just sort of the nature of the NFL, is that contracts only get bigger and bigger, and they just keep one-upping each other, right? When the Browns extended Denzel Ward, what did the Packers do? They extended Jair Alexander and paid him $500,000 more. Not because he's $500,000 better, definitely better, but because it's a one-upping league here. Now, Jessie Bates, the last 4 seasons, we've seen this graphic a million times if you watch the show frequently. But if you're new, he's been one of the best safeties in football, right? I don't present any new information. I'm not here to persuade anyone and say that Jessie Bates is a good safety. We all know that Jessie Bates is one of the best safeties in football. But my preference would be, I'd rather spend big on the defensive line. That might be an unpopular opinion, but if I had to pick between a bigger name defensive lineman or Jessie Bates, Bates is a better player than, say, a Zach Allen or a Draymond Jones. But I think defensive line is just a bigger need right now. And I'm confident in Grant Delpit. In Delpit, we trust, right? I am making that the tagline of the show for the offseason. I am a fan of Grant Delpit after a great second half of the season. So I'd rather spend big on defensive line than safety. But which one do you think the Browns should go after? If you had to pick between a big name safety or a big name free agent on the D-line, which one would it be? Bates, really safety, but we're really just looking at Bates specifically here, or a big name defensive lineman who we'll get to in a moment, but pouring one out for Daron Payne. That was tough to see while I was gone. The reason why I lean defensive line is because the Browns got zero production, essentially, from their defensive line outside of Myles Garrett. Look at the 2022 stats right now. Myles Garrett had 16 sacks. Combine the other 3 starters, Clowney, Bryan, and Elliott, and we're looking at 7 total sacks. Not even half of what Myles Garrett got, and you're combining your 3 other starters. That is simply atrocious, and it needs to be better. That is why I think the Browns can manage without Jessie Bates. They can make do with Grant Delpit and a lesser-named safety. But they cannot afford to repeat what was an awful defensive line outside of 95. Speaking of the defensive line, I was gone when the news broke. I forecasted it. I said it was very, very likely that he got franchise tagged. I was banking on the Washington Commanders to be themselves, which is one of the stupidest franchises in football. That's why they got an F- from the players' report card. But pour one out for Daron Payne. It was a fun ride. It was great, but it is over now. Some other defensive line free agents to keep an eye on now that Payne is out of the mix. Javon Hargrave has been mentioned multiple times by MKC, so that definitely has some legs to it. Could Draymond Jones be returning to the Cleveland area? Kind of get the sense that he is done with the Broncos. Zach Allen and the Cardinals, that's another name. He's been rising lately. I don't know what Arizona wants to do, right? Do they want to give money out to players who they're trying to rebuild and hold on to some key members? Maybe. Shy Tuttle and Tier Tart I put on there. One, I've been talking about them for months at this point because if the Browns don't get a big-name guy like Daron Payne, which is already out of the race, and Javon Hargrave goes elsewhere, he gets more money from the Bears who have $100 million to spend. Well, maybe they kind of focus on some smaller names like Shy Tuttle or Tier Tart. Okay, let's move on here to the Combine now because the defensive line, if you guys haven't seen, has been balling out at the NFL Combine so far. So I do think there is some merit to the idea of, well, you could sign Jessie Bates, not go the defensive line route in free agency, and devote the 42nd overall pick to one of many excellent defensive linemen so far who have showcased themselves as potential first-round picks, and there's only so many defensive linemen that are going to go in round 1. So that could be an avenue for Andrew Berry. After seeing some of these guys that I wouldn't say were no-namers, but they weren't first-round name buzz before the Combine, they're looking more and more like first-round name buzz. So maybe Andrew Berry decides, sign Bates and draft defensive line. That's the best 1-2 punch I can get this offseason. Next up on the show, I want to talk about this pretty, I wouldn't say wacky, but pretty outlandish, far-reaching idea of the Browns moving up to get Jalen Carter if he starts falling down the draft board in April because of the big news bombshell story that dropped just a few days ago. Now, there is an awesome deal I want to quickly share with you guys at Fanatics. St. Patrick's Day is right around the corner. It's coming up in 2+ weeks. and you still have time to get this really cool brown St. Patty's gear. So if you're going to be going to a St. Patrick's Day party and you want to be wearing green, right? But you also want to be repping your favorite team, get this awesome shirt at Fanatics. It's under $30. Really good deal. Chatsports.com/BrownsGreen. I put that link for everyone in the comments and the description of today's show. So the Jalen Carter story that broke over the start of the NFL Combine was huge, right? He was arrested on charges of reckless driving and racing stemming from the tragic fatal car accident that involved two members of the UGA football program shortly after their national championship. He left the NFL Combine, went back to Athens because there was a warrant out for his arrest, and he posted bail like 16 minutes later and then went back to Indianapolis to resume his NFL Combine showcase. So some people are wondering, could this arrest lead to his draft stock tanking and maybe somehow get him in the range where the Browns could move up and get him? I saw Garrett Bush on Lockdown Browns talking about that. Great show, and I thought we could bring it over here and discuss it because Jalen Carter, we know, is a top 5 pick in this upcoming NFL draft. Last year for the Bulldogs, 7 tackles for loss, 3 sacks. I know those numbers don't jump off the screen, but who are we kidding here? Jalen Carter was a one-man wrecking ball for the Georgia Bulldogs defense last year, and he's a no doubt top 5 pick this year. At least we thought, right? Well, we have seen, I wouldn't say this story play out before, but we have seen similar stories play out before of players starting to fall down the draft board because an off-the-field story surfaces shortly before the NFL draft. Now, I'm going to quickly nip this in the butt and say, if Carter does start falling, right, if the Bears trade out of number 1 because, I don't know, the Colts want to go get C.J. Stroud, right, whatever it is, and Carter starts to fall from 1 to 2 because quarterbacks go 1, 2, Will Anderson goes 3, someone else goes 4, now the 5th round pick is on the clock, and they start panicking because why is Carter there? And it's like draft day all over, and he somehow begins to really tumble from 6 down to 7, down to 9. Could Cleveland pick up the phone and land Jalen Carter and end up with what some thought would be the first overall pick in the draft in the teens? I mean, we have seen people fall down the draft before, not due to injuries, which, well, we've seen that plenty of times, but specifically due to off-the-field issues, right? Laramie Tunsil, of course we know, fell quite a bit, the Ole Miss tackle, to the Dolphins at 13. Joe Mixon fell to the 2nd round. I don't think he was a unanimous first rounder, but he definitely had his draft stock take a hit. Josh Allen, I didn't really remember this, but he had some bad tweets surface before the draft. He didn't fall all that far, but I guess you can kind of put him in this category. He only went to 7. I don't think he would have gone much higher anyway, but that was a factor for sure. So what could it cost for the Browns to move up and get Jalen Carter? They don't have a first-round pick this year, of course, or next year. Good reminder, or next year. If they took their 2nd-round pick this year, their 3rd-round pick this year, and their 2nd-round pick next year, their 3 best assets in the draft for the next 2 years, that would land you in the range of 16 to 20. He's not falling that far. Like, he might fall, right? And there will be a team who does a press conference that says, we felt comfortable with the character and getting to know Jalen Carter, and are absolute that all the legal uncertainties will be smoothed over. And they could be before the draft. But he's not falling to a spot where the Browns could get him without giving up a first. Now, if I think the Steelers are at 16, but if they can get to 17, I mean, Jalen Carter talent alone, that'd be highway robbery. We're talking about getting a first overall pick potentially around 17 or 18. That would be the ultimate heist of the NFL draft. Now, it also would come with a lot of, question marks around his character and whatnot for having some sort of involvement. Well, allegedly, that's the word I'm looking for. Allegedly having an involvement, right? He has his side of the story to share, no doubt about it. But would you give up those 3 picks to get Jalen Carter? If Cleveland could pick up the phone and move to 18 and get a deal done, would you do it if you were Andrew Berry? Yes or no? I know it's tough to move on from a bunch of picks after the Deshaun Watson deal, but You're telling me you would not give up 2 seconds in the third for Jalen Carter? Come on. That's a no-doubter in my brain. From talent alone, off the field, we are talking about the Cleveland Browns, who made peace with Deshaun Watson last year. So I don't think Andrew Berry would be one GM who would shy away from someone who is under the public microscope right now, to say the least. All right, before we sign off, I know I was gone for a week, so we didn't really get to do it, but I wanted to get back to our daily random Browns player who you guys commented, and I'm going with Rob Miller's Brian Hartline. Why? Because Ohio State is wide receiver U. It's an absolute factory thanks to Hartline, and he's our random Browns player of the day. So shout out to Rob Miller. Appreciate everyone for tuning into today's show. So good to be back. Looking forward to really ramping up our coverage for the NFL draft, free agency, and the combine in the coming weeks.